In this lesson, we'll take a look at some of the things to be aware of when exporting our geometry from ZBrush. So we have our maps exported, let's say, so now we want to go ahead and export some of these pieces of geometry. Well, let's take a look at some of the default settings here within Preferences. We can look under Import Export, and you'll notice we have a lot of these flip X, Y, and Z values here. None of these are checked at the moment. So let's take a look at what happens when we export this particular piece. So if we go ahead and export this as is and bring it into Maya, we'll get something that looks like this. And you'll notice that the Y and the Z are flipped, and that's because of the way that we drew this onto the canvas, onto our plane to position it. So that's not a problem, but we do need to be aware of this, because when we come in and bring this into Maya, it's going to be oriented wrong. So what we can do is figure out how we need to flip this around. So right now the Y is basically forward and the Z is pointing down. So what we want to do is flip, first of all, the Y and the Z. So if we do that, the bottom of this guy will now be facing up. So we need to switch Y and Z, and then we also need to flip it in the Y. So let's go back to ZBrush and see how that works. We can go into Preferences, we can switch the Y and Z, and then flip the Y. If we now go ahead and export that, and let's choose a good subdivision level, so we've got about 20,000, I think that's probably pretty good. Let's go ahead and now export that out. Before we do that, we want to make sure to go down to our export settings and check some of these things out. We first want to, I'm going to go ahead and merge the UV coordinates together, and if we take a look under the display properties, we'll see that this particular piece has double-sided on. If we turn that off, you can see that the normals are flipped here in ZBrush. So to flip those faces on export, we'll simply hit the little flip face button. Okay, we can now choose export, and then we can call this flip test. If we want to, go ahead and save that out. And now here in Maya, if we go ahead and now import our flip test, you can see that it's now oriented properly. Okay, and the normals are not flipped. Everything is good to go. So when you're exporting your geometry, just make sure that you've got these buttons flipped. Now on this particular model, we wanted to flip the faces, but on a lot of these other ones, we're not going to have that issue. You can see we don't have the double-sided on, and we can still see it, so we're not going to have that issue. So you want to come in, for instance, on the fish, and want to make sure that our import-export settings are the same on all the pieces. Okay, and then we'll come in, choose a good subdivision level. So here is 17,000. Maybe level 2 would be good. So let's now go ahead and export this. So we can say export, call this fish, and just start to assemble all of our different pieces. For the tongue, you can take a look at this. Right now it's at about 33,000. Let's take it down a couple of notches till about 2,000. And you could probably do something even as low as 500 if you want to do that. If we want to get a little bit more detail in here, do something like this, 2,000. And we go in and export. And let's export the tongue. Alright, so just go through the process on all of these pieces. Check the resolution, make sure it's nothing too high, but it's high enough to get the kind of detail that you want to get. Okay, go through the process on all of the rest of these different pieces and just export those OBJs out. Alright, and once you get those OBJs exported, keeping in mind that we want to flip the Y and the Z, switch the Y and the Z rather, and then flip the Y, and also on the main body, you check and make sure if your body happens to have double-sided turned on, turn that off. If it's inside out, then go ahead and turn on this flip button when you export that out so that you can export the geometry into Maya. You can also flip those normals within Maya if you want to. So just get your maps exported, get your geometry exported, keeping in mind our orientation issues. And then in the next lesson, we'll take a look at getting our normal and displacements out. So getting all the sculpted detail that we've created out into some sort of a usable form that we can take advantage of in Maya. So we're almost done here with the ZBrush portion. Let's go ahead and look at normal and displacement maps in the next lesson.